One of the biggest problems we have in the church and just with believers in general, there's got a lot of people that know scripture and have absolutely no idea how to apply it. Here's what I mean. Take a biblical concept like the armor of God, right? You got the armor of God. We understand the concept. There's a spiritual war, there are spiritual enemies, and we need to have spiritual armor. And that spiritual armor is somehow supposed to protect us, right? Most people understand this concept. Most people that go to church have heard this taught and they get the premise. But here's the thing. How do you put it on? How do you use the armor of God? See, we got people that wake up in the morning and they pray and they go, okay, I'm going to put on the helmet of salvation. I'm going to put on the breastplate of righteousness. And I'm going to put on the belt of truth. I'm going to walk out here and I'm going to be ready for this spiritual warfare. But what does that mean? How did you put on the belt of truth? Where did you get it? Does it hang in your closet? Did you pull it down from the Spirit somehow? And what does it do? What does it protect you from? How is the belt of truth protecting you? How is the helmet of salvation protecting you? What specific attack is this protecting you from? And in what way is it doing it? It's just one of countless theological concepts that the vast majority of believers have rolling around in their minds, and yet they have absolutely no clue what it means, how it works, or how to use it to their advantage. Now, the obvious question here is why? Why is this happening? Or maybe more particularly, how? How do so many people have so much knowledge about Bible, so much knowledge about Scripture and about God, and yet somehow they're not actually understanding the knowledge that they have, or at least understanding in a way that they can use it? Now, most commonly, I hear people say things like, well, they're just not applying the word. It's like, well, how do you apply a word that you don't actually understand? Right? Going back to the armor of God, this is a powerful word. Paul seems to be indicating something tremendously important. If you go back and read this scripture, Paul says that you need to put on the full armor of God so that you can stand up to the schemes of the devil. And in fact, he even doubles down and says, not only that, but when the evil day comes, not if the evil day comes. I want to make sure we talk about that. Not if the evil day comes, when the evil day comes. You need to have the full armor of God so that you can withstand the attack and remain standing after the attack has been completed. That sounds like a pretty important thing. The fact that Paul is not saying if, but Paul is indicating that there will be a spiritual attack, one that combines the total schemes of the devil that will all descend upon you simultaneously in some type of formulaic attack that is specifically designed to take you out. And you need to have the armor of God fully on, fully vested, fully covering you so that you can resist that and still be standing afterwards. And we think that maybe this is something metaphorical that we can talk about and conceptualize, but we don't need to actually understand how to put it on. Guys, we're missing it here. Now, I'm not going to do a full breakdown on the armor of God right now. That's for another video, but I will tell you something really strange that most of you may not know. Did you realize that the armor of God actually didn't originate in the New Testament Ephesians, but actually it originated in, I believe it was Isaiah. I have to double check on that. But that's what Paul is drawing from. And the person who put on the armor of God initially was not us, but God himself when he was planning to dole out his wrath in the earth. Just want you to process that for a minute. When Paul tells us to put on the armor of God, specifically the breastplate of righteousness and the helmet of salvation, those are the two primary mentions in the Old Testament. These are things that God is putting on because he is fed up and he is planning to execute his justice in the earth. There's a correlation there. Not quite ready to draw it yet, but I just wanted to point it out because once again, my point is that these things are important. We have to stop being naive and immature in our faith. We have to go beyond the elementary things, like Paul says in Hebrews. Let us go on to maturity, not laying again the foundation of the elementary doctrines. And what are the elementary doctrines? Turning from acts that lead to death, sin, right? Lessons about washings, baptisms, transference of sin, how our sin moves from us to Jesus, resurrection of the dead, Jesus raising from the dead, us raising from the dead. Guys, these are elementary things, the things that we predominantly talk about on Sunday morning, the things that cover the vast majority of our Bible studies, the things that we are spending the vast majority of our time oscillating around over and over and over and over again. These are elementary things. They are insufficient to hold up to the severity of attack that our enemy has in store for us. And if we do not start growing up in our faith and learning to move beyond just simply turning away from sin, but starting to understand the spiritual realm, how it works, how we engage it, if we don't start doing that, we are easy prey for the enemy. Now, I said a lot, and I don't want to just leave you with a concept and nothing that you can actually apply, because the whole point of this is to spur you on and encourage you to go beyond just the elementary things and actually begin applying some of this stuff. So I'm going to give you a foundation to work from, and then from there, you and the Spirit can work this out the rest of the way. The way that we begin moving beyond the elementary things is simply this: applied faith. We read the Word. The Word says that this is how something works. And so we apply that thing in faith until the time comes that we see God's ways begin to conform the natural experience that we're having to His reality. That's what Abraham did. If you go back in the Old Testament, it says that Abraham, when he considered his own body and his wife's body, both of them being well past childbearing years, okay? He doesn't say that when Abraham ignored or pretended like these things didn't exist. It doesn't say that when Abraham blindly believed something with no evidence. No, what it says is Abraham sat down and considered. He took time to take stock of and account of the status of the reality that he was currently occupying. But when he took consideration of that, he did not falter in holding on to the promise of God. That was a very specific thing, a specific promise, something that God had told him that's important to make a distinction of. We're not just talking about purely scripture, things that you read in the Word. We're talking about a direct word from the Lord. When he considered his current situation, he did not deviate from the word, the promise that God had given to him. He held on to that promise. And it says that in so doing, by faith, he then was able to be given power to give birth to a child, even though both him and his wife's bodies were well beyond childbearing years. Now, here's what we saw happen there. What we saw happen there was Abraham was living in a reality that was lesser than God's reality. And he held on to God's reality until his reality conformed to God's. Now, what we typically do as human beings is we tend to see something that God said in Scripture, or maybe something that God said to us, a promise that he made to us, and we go and we try to apply it. And then when our reality does not immediately conform to God's reality, we start changing the word. We change the thing that we read in Scripture. We say, well, that must have been cultural. Well, that must have just been for that time. Well, there was this dispensation and these things just don't exist anymore. We start making stuff up to try and cover the fact that there is a gap between the moment that we tried to execute on or to hold on to the thing that God had promised and the reality that we're experiencing. But you have to remember that it was many, many years between the time that God gave Abraham the promise and the time that that promise was fulfilled. Many years. You see, Abraham went for so long that him and his wife actually got the bright idea that they thought maybe God needs our help. It took him so long to show up and fulfill the promise that he had made that Abraham and Sarah thought maybe God needs us to get involved in this situation. Maybe he's waiting on us and we're not waiting on him. But in the end, what we found out was that that wasn't the case at all. It was just that God was waiting until his time, until it was the right time for him to act and to fulfill the promise. And the fact that Abraham held on to that promise by faith until such a time as God decided to enact the promise, because he was able to do that, because he was willing to do that, he was given power to give birth to a son well outside of childbearing years. He was given power to see this reality conform to God's reality. But the foundation of that was acting on faith. It was taking something that God had said to Abraham and holding on to it until he could see the thing come about. Now, there's a couple of things that have to happen for you to be able to have a similar experience. First off, you have to be actually walking with the Lord. You have to be presently, daily engaging with Him. It's not a passive thing. You don't add God to your existing life. Your whole entire life, your whole worldview is shaped by the relationship with God. You already have to be in a different reality where your decision making doesn't begin with, I want to do this. This is where I think I should go. This is what I need. So therefore I need to go do this. It begins with, God, where are you going? Where are you taking me? What is your will for my life? How ought I to be living? That's where your starting point is. So you have to start with proper orientation. Scripture says no longer conform to the former pattern of life. That's the way that you lived before you met Jesus. And we're not talking about the negative things. We're not even talking about the sinful stuff. We are talking about the pattern of life, the pattern of this earth. The pattern of this earth is survive. Once you get survival, then you start worrying about pleasure. Once you get pleasure, you start worrying about expansion. That's the pattern of this life. And it says, no, we don't start there. Jesus says, don't even worry about your survival. Don't worry about what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, what you're going to wear. No, Jesus says, seek first the kingdom and His righteousness, and then these things will be added to you. You see, it's a reprioritization. We have to reorient ourselves. And in so doing, in so reorienting ourselves, something happens. See, if you follow that scripture that Paul says, where he says, no longer conform to the former pattern of life, you keep allowing yourself to be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that what? You will be able to know the will of God and be able to agree with Him that it is good, satisfying, and able to succeed. So it's not arbitrary. There's a purpose to this. The purpose of getting close to God is not for nothing. The purpose of getting close to God is so that you can not only get to know Him, but begin to understand the purposes and the will that He has for you. And in so doing, you then also have to develop the belief and the strength of faith and conviction that the things that He wants you to do are not only going to be intrinsically good, but they'll satisfy you personally, and that it can actually work. That the plan that He gives you is going to work. A lot of people, they stop short of intrinsically good. They see the plan that God has for their life and they go, that's good, right? I think that's a good thing. But it's not satisfying. They look at it kind of, if you think about it like Jesus going to the cross, Jesus going to the cross, looking at it from the outside, you go, yeah, it's intrinsically good to save the world. But going through the cross to get there doesn't seem personally satisfying. And there's probably a big concern about, is this even going to work? Right? Because I've got to go die, separate myself from the Father, and then trust that He's going to bring me back. Now, Jesus was Jesus. He knew the Father, and so obviously He had full trust that all that was going to happen. But for a human being, that's a terrifying prospect. And so what happens is a lot of us, we stop short of the satisfying or the able to succeed. A lot of us, we get to the good and we go, okay, I see that it's good, but I don't have the faith, the certainty that that's going to be satisfying to me personally, and so I got to stop here. Or some people, they get past satisfying, but then they get hung up on, I believe this is good, I believe it will be satisfying, but I'm not 100% sure that's going to work. Like, I don't have quite enough faith to believe that that is actually going to work, which is why it requires daily walking in faith, hearing God, getting close to God, learning what it is that He wants us to do, and then taking steps of faith and watching Him show up moment by moment in each one of those steps. It is only in that context that we can begin to go on to maturity, where we start to have the capacity to understand the deep wisdom and the mysteries that are in Scripture, like the armor of God, where our eyes begin to be open to the realities of the spiritual realm, not just open to them to be aware that they exist, but open to them to understand how to actually interact with them, how to prepare and to properly equip ourselves so that when the evil day comes, as Paul talked about, we are actually able to stand through it. As a believer, going on to maturity is not optional. It's not even just an expectation. It is necessary to your very survival as a believer.